So we just talked about what a pathogen is. It's an organism that causes disease. Um, and so new diseases emerge all the time. And an emergent disease is just one that's not previously known or one that has been absent for at least 20 years. Many emergent diseases are zoonosis, or an infectious disease caused by a pathogen that originated in a non-human animal, usually a vertebrate, and then jumped to a person. So examples include bird flu, Ebola, HIV, Zika, COVID-19, and there are many, many, many other examples. So the bird flu one is obvious, coming from birds. Ebola is thought to come from bats. And then a lot of times it gets magnified if a chimpanzee gets infected, and then if people are killing chimpanzees, they're much more likely to get infected with Ebola. HIV similarly is thought to have originated in primates, and these weren't thought, they think that maybe somebody was butchering a monkey or a primate or another type of ape or something, and they had a cut on their arm or something like that, and so there was blood-to-blood contact purely by accident. Similarly, Zika is mosquito transmitted, but it's thought to have originated in primates in South America. COVID-19 is thought to occur from some wildlife in China that jumped to people in a what's called a wet market, where they were selling different wildlife. So this shows some different recent human disease outbreaks. You can see that there are a lot of them. This includes a lot of things from the 1990s and in the 2000s. And there are a lot of different ones here listed. So zoonoses, most come from wildlife. Many pathogens that are already present in wildlife, we know pretty much nothing about. Some groups of wildlife, particularly mammals, have a lot of pathogens that, could potentially jump to people at some point. These zoonotic diseases are exacerbated by habitat destruction and the legal and illegal wildlife trade. Both of these things increase human-wildlife contact. So as people are, cutting down trees in the rainforest or something, they're more likely to come into contact with wildlife. And particularly if they're in the wildlife trade, if they're catching wildlife, they're much more likely to come into close contact where there is the potential for pathogen transmission. Once this happens, this probably happened in the past, but before globalization occurred, that pathogen probably stayed very local and then fizzled out. However, now that we have a globalized society, air travel makes it possible for you to come into contact with wildlife that has a pathogen one day and then be on the complete other side of the world a day later. And so that means that we can spread diseases very quickly before we even realize what's going on. And that's basically, what happened with COVID and bird flu and some of these other things that have related or have caused pandemics. So here's another example of a recent human disease outbreak. This is Legionnaire's disease. It looks a lot like pneumonia. So sometimes when Legionnaire's disease occurs in the hospitals, they don't realize that's what it is. They think that it's pneumonia. Sometimes this bacteria will get in air conditioning systems, and this happened in Disneyland a few years ago. It's happened at a convention in Philadelphia. This is where it was first identified in the 1970s. But it spreads by air to different people, and they get what looks like pneumonia, essentially. So we said that some of these pathogens are transmitted by vectors. So another animal that's not affected by the pathogen that can transfer it from one person to another. A common one is mosquitoes. So this shows the life cycle of malaria. And so we see the mosquito bites a person, gets the eggs, and then if they bite another person, they can infect another person with malaria. I'm sorry, I said bacteria, protozoan that causes malaria. Interestingly, this protozoan is now resistant to most anti-malarial drugs, and the mosquitoes that transmit the parasite have developed resistance to many insecticides. So natural selection can allow organisms to evolve very rapidly. Protozoans and bacteria have very short generation time, so they can evolve very quickly. Mosquitoes also similarly have very short generation times, which allows them to go through evolution very quickly. By using drugs to kill malaria, we're essentially providing a selective measure on the population to kill off the most sensitive individuals to the drug, and then the ones that are not as sensitive remain. And if we keep doing that over and over again, over time, that selects for organisms that are more resistant to these drugs. Similarly with mosquitoes, if we spray an insecticide over an area and we kill off all the ones that are very sensitive to the insecticide, then the ones that are more resistant remain, and if we do that over and over again, it selects for ones that are more resistant to that insecticide. People do have a tendency to overuse pesticides, and that speeds up this process. I don't know if you've seen this, but there are trucks that go up and down the streets of Ruston and probably many other towns in Louisiana, and they're just spraying insecticides to try and kill mosquitoes to keep the prevalence of West Nile virus down, but that could speed up the resistance of mosquitoes to these pesticides. So with this, we have lots of problems with resistance to different chemicals that we would like to use to control both pathogens and vectors of pathogens. So an important concern is antibiotic resistance. So antibiotics are chemicals that kill or inhibit growth of a bacteria. Many people take antibiotics and don't finish the full course of the antibiotics they're supposed to take. So when you go to the doctor and they say, here, you need to take this for 10 days, you need to take it for 10 days, or you're actually selecting for a resistance of the bacteria. Antibiotic resistant strains of MRSA, which is a form of a staph infection, are spreading through hospitals in the US and China and resulting in thousands of deaths. You've probably heard of some cases where people went to the hospital and they picked up an infection from the hospital and died when they had something that, they didn't necessarily, just something that needed to be helped by something in the hospital. Getting this infection might mean that they die even though they were not having any kind of life-threatening condition. So in the US, over 19,000 deaths are estimated to have occurred from over 100,000 of these antibiotic-resistant staph infections. We also see that at least half of the 100 million antibiotic doses prescribed in the US every year are unnecessary, or they're the wrong drug. This also relates to increasing antibiotic resistance of the different bacteria. And you'll see, and I've had this happen, you go to the doctor and they're like, we don't know what you have, but we're going to give you an antibiotic. And it's like, well, what if I have a virus? And some of you may not know, but antibiotics only kill bacteria. So like if you get the flu or a cold or COVID, that's a virus. antibiotics cannot kill viruses. Only antivirals can kill viruses. So if you have a cold or the flu, do not ask for antibiotics because that's not what's going to help you. And by over prescribing these or asking for them from your doctor, a lot of times they'll give them to you if you just ask for them, that increases antibiotic resistance. What that means is that our antibiotics are going to stop working. So that means that you could get sick and they could try different antibiotics if you're infected with a bacteria. And if you have a antibiotic resistant strain, then it's not going to work. Those bacteria that you have in your system don't care if you take an antibiotic because they have ways to deal with that. And that means that you could stay sick. And so we need our antibiotics to keep working if we want to keep fighting pathogens that are bacteria. It's also important to note that a big part of the reason we have antibiotic resistance is because antibiotics are routinely fed to U.S. farm animals to stimulate weight gain. And residuals are excreted in urine and feces and make their way into our surface waters. And this can select for bacteria that are resistant to the antibiotics. Some antibacterial chemicals have recently been banned from soaps and other household items by the FDA. And part of this is to help with this antibiotic resistance problem. So how does this work? So we have a bacterial colony. You give it an antibiotic. Most of them die. See these ones, they die. And you can see that the red is their DNA. This green segment is supposed to be a mutation. So the one that has the mutation, it's a resistant mutation. It means that when they're exposed to this antibiotic, this particular cell does not die, whereas all the other ones that don't have the mutation do die. The next generation, all of the individuals come from this one cell. This cell was successful, it's going to reproduce, and it's going to pass on this resistant gene to all of the different cells. We also see that bacteria do weird things. And so they can actually transfer genes to one another from different species, which is really weird, or from different strains. And so this is called conjugation, where you might have a harmless drug-resistant bacteria and a harmful bacteria, and they can actually exchange drug-resistant genes. And then all of a sudden, the harmful one has this mutation that allows them to be resistant to the antibiotics, and this is passed on to the next generations. All right, so next I'll give you have another video that shows antibacterial resistance in action.